Welcome back to the Elias Macko Show, second hour of the program. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears some of you are buying the dip. The stock, it's just ticking upwards now. We're still in the red for today, but it's not as bad as it was, dare I say, half an hour ago. Richard Lapointe's going to join us at 10:20. We'll take a look at the markets and what's happening there. We begin the second hour of the program, though, with David L. Cohen, former United States ambassador to Canada, ended his run as ambassador at the beginning of this year, and he joined us at that time as well. And it's our pleasure to welcome David Cohen back onto the program. Do you still keep the ambassador title? Do I get to still call you ambassador, or does that goes away after you lose the role? How does that work?
So in the United States, we actually keep the title of ambassador for life.
Oh, I love that.
I'm even allowed to use the term ambassador in my stationery and things like that. So it's ambassador retired, if you will. So you introduced me perfectly.
Well,
United States ambassador to Canada.
And I love that I get to call you Ambassador Cohen throughout this interview. It's great to have you back on, by the way. Last time in our studios, now over the phone from your home in the U.S. So let's talk about this. You're a business guy, by the way. Before you were an ambassador, you had successful times in business, working at Comcast, high role at Comcast at one point. I just want before we get into the Canada-U.S. relationship, how are you viewing what's happening right now? The world markets being in flux, tariffs and all that. What's your perspective on this?
Well, I think for like most business people and almost every business person, there's significant concern over the approach of the Trump administration. And understand the goal here is a goal that a lot of business people share, which is to bring jobs back to America and to grow the American economy. The tactic, I think, is what is troubling so many people, and certainly what troubles me. I mean, I have complete respect for the democratic process, for the results of the presidential election, and whether Donald Trump was my candidate or not, he was elected by a majority of the American public. He is the president of the United States. He is entitled to attempt to implement his image for the country and his vision for the country, for trade and for everything else. He's not entitled to his own facts. And I think that's where I have my personal pushback, and I think where business people have their pushback, because the tariff policy has been called by multiple business people, including business people who supported Donald Trump, as chaotic and unexplained. And if there's one thing that businesses don't like, if there's one thing that they can't tolerate, it is a lack of consistency, it is chaos in decision-making, and I think the irony is that chaotic process, that incoherent policy, is going to discourage the very investment that President Trump is trying to encourage through his tariff policy.
Now, as a layperson, as a radio host who's not an economist, I could sort of understand going after China, right, and trying to sort of maybe fix an imbalance with countries like China. Where I take a step back and say, geez, it seems like, Canada's also been on the hit list. I know we didn't get it as bad last week as other countries, but just even the stuff on the cars and any idea of opening up the USMCA, the trade agreement. How do you view that side of things, Ambassador Cohen? How Donald Trump has specifically attacked Canada?
Well, I obviously don't like the attacks on Canada. I don't like the attacks on Europe, on the UK, on Germany. I don't like the attacks on Japan and South Korea. These are important United States allies, not only in the trade context, but in the defense context and in the intelligence context. And as a layperson, I think you've nailed it. There is a difference between China and Canada. China, if you want to put a significant tariff on Chinese goods and products, I mean, they're paying their workers 50 cents an hour. They don't respect environmental standards. They have a very lax regulatory framework. It is an uneven playing field. And using tariffs to attempt to level the playing field is appropriate when you are dealing with a country like China. And that's why, by the way, President Trump, in his first term, put significant tariffs on Chinese-produced automobiles, by way of example, and on Chinese steel. And imbued almost all of those tariffs because they were reasoned, they were principled, they had an important and sound analytic underpinning to them. Across-the-board tariffs that apply to everyone, including Canada, including Europe, including Asia, they are harder to defend because it is harder to figure out just what it is that President Trump is trying to accomplish by tariffing, for example, Canadian automobiles, where our supply chains are so interconnected with the United States, where there are so many U.S. jobs tied up in Canadian automobile production. And I point out to people all the time, name the top 3 Canadian automobile producers. There are companies called Stellantis, Ford, General Motors, 3 big U.S. companies. So who are we punishing as a result of putting tariffs on Canadian-produced automobiles other than U.S. automobile companies, U.S. supply chains supplying parts to Canadian-produced automobile companies, and ultimately United States consumers who will be paying, according to the estimates, anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000 more a car for the cars that they are buying. That contributes to inflation. It restricts GDP growth, economic growth. It is not consistent with the overall goals that President Trump has articulated for the American economy. And that's my problem. It's not an opposition to all tariffs. It's an opposition to across-the-board tariffs applied indiscriminately to friend and foe alike in a way that raises prices, contributes to inflation, restricts economic growth. And right before I came on, you commented on the impact on stock market, on the world stock market. The United States markets are down another 3 or 4% at the open today. This will be the largest 3-day drop in the U.S. stock market since the recession in 1987 and Black Monday. And this is not the goal and should not be the goal of the U.S. administration.
We're with David Cohen, a former United States ambassador to Canada. I don't often do this, but I'm going to ask you for a best guess, okay? Because we're trying to figure out, just what the Trump administration wants from Canada. Now, we've had this discussion in the past, and I've spoken with other members of other U.S. officials who have mentioned this to me. There have been issues in the Canada-U.S. relationship. Maybe they'd be best explained or best described as annoyances, where the United States has been annoyed at how Canada has done a few things. Can you tell me from your perspective and under the Biden administration, were there any annoyances that go up to the level where you think, okay, an administration needed to be tougher against Canada?
So the answer is there were differences. It's okay with me to call them annoyances, but they were persistent annoyances. And so, the issue of Canada's vigilance in enforcing the border, both against importation of fentanyl and irregular migration and illegal immigration across the border, I think Canada took some steps. I mean, it's something that I talked about frequently with my Canadian counterparts, and it's something that the president talked about with the prime minister. But there remained annoyances. There are annoyances in Canada's treatment of dairy. It's interesting. It's not the level of tariffs, because although there are those 250%, 300% tariff levels on the books for Canada, for Canada against the U.S., we've never hit the thresholds where those tariffs would go into play. But Canada's supply management system in dairy is a significant irritant, and it is an irritant that Canada refused to do anything about. And I hear Prime Minister Carney insisting that Canada's supply management system for dairy, which protects the Canadian dairy market against imports from the United States, from Australia, and from other countries, is a significant irritant. Softwood lumber remains an irritant, and proposed doubling of, or the possible doubling of the softwood lumber tariffs is also in the news today. And that is an irritant. There is no doubt about it, because it is indisputable that Canada impermissibly, and pardon my use of the word impermissibly, favors Canadian lumber producers by the way in which it charges them rent and stumpage fees for harvesting lumber on government-owned land that gives them an unfair competitive advantage against U.S. lumber producers. In that sense, Canada is no different than China. They are behaving exactly the same way with respect to lumber as China is behaving with respect to automobiles. But under the Biden administration, under the Bush administration, under the first Trump administration, under Republican and Democratic administrations in the past, given the interconnected nature of the supply chains, given the 150-year friendship and allyship between the countries, these were issues that were being dealt with through negotiation, through more traditional diplomatic channels, through things like softwood lumber tariffs, through complaints being filed under the USMCA, or CUSMA as it's called in Canada. And I think those are the more appropriate ways to deal with those types of disputes and those types of differences than large across-the-board tariffs that can't even be explained
Ambassador?
by the Trump administration in terms of how they're being calculated and where they're coming from. And frankly, I'd like to think, if rationality prevails, that that's one of the reasons why Canada was not named in the list of countries for which there were significant reciprocal tariffs being imposed last week. I'll give you a dirty little secret that I know Ambassador Hillman for Canada has been talking about, but in the USMCA negotiations replacing NAFTA under the first Trump administration, Canada eliminated most of its tariffs. So Canada doesn't even have tariffs right now for most goods and services against the United States. So it is hard to answer the question of exactly what the Trump administration wants from Canada at this point. Other than the issues that I identified and the handful of remaining tariffs that may exist, it's hard to find anything else that Canada needs to do.
Ambassador Cohen, we're going to have to leave it there. I'll let you in on some good news or breaking news, and that is the stock market right now showing green, like a 3-point swing while we were talking.
Yeah, I saw that Dow is now up 1 point.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's the thing about the stock market. But of course, it's up that 1 point. The stock market has still lost about $6 trillion since President Trump's tariff announcements, and it's lost about $11 trillion since President Trump's inauguration. So we have a ways to go to make up for all of these deficits.
We got to leave it there. I want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Elias. It's good to talk to you again.